Okay, so we'll start the podcast proper in a moment, but I've got something to say first of all. I want to acknowledge the passing of someone who meant a lot to me and to many other people who followed motorsport over the years. To people looking solely at the F1 record books, Alex Zanardi is a driver who scored 1 point in his entire F1 career and who never quite got to grips with the Williams when he got his chance with that team. But to people who saw Zanardi at his peak, he was exactly what we look for in a racing driver. Passionate, fast and aggressive where he needed to be. That run of 2 consecutive kart titles with Chip Ganassi Racing featured some of the most exciting driving on the edge that you'll see in motorsport. IndyCar made an hour-long video just after he passed away, aged 59, of his highlights from those years. But honestly, if that's not enough for you, go on Daily Motion and find a full race replay if you can. There was just something about those big, heavy turbo cars of that time that channeled everything that was effective about his elbows-out driving style, and between the end of the 96 season, when he really got to grips with the car, and that 98 season, that run was nearly unstoppable. He was effectively the Gilles Villeneuve for my era, as I understand it. Yeah, and without going into much further ado, the move Zanardi will be best known for by his fans is when he overtook Brian Herter on the inside of the corkscrew at Laguna Seca in 1996. The corkscrew is a corner where you have to slow down hard after a long uphill straight, and then take a left-right down a very steep hill. It's an example of circuit designers taking advantage of nature. Zanardi decided not to bother with the usual braking because it was the last lap. He steamed up the inside of Herter on the most challenging part of the track, covering his right front with sand and taking the checkered flag in the lead. Brian Herter was a decent driver at that time and not someone you expect to be mugged, but Zanardi had ensured with that move that he would write them both into folklore. We didn't care about track limits then, and we still don't care about track limits now. Rest well, Alex Zanardi, and thank you. All right, so let's get on with the podcast then. This is the Motion Racing Podcast, and we're looking back at the Berlin E-Prix, but we're also looking forward to the Monaco E-Prix and a few Formula E-related talking points. So, welcome back, Georgie Mackay. Berlin, bit of a curious egg of a race, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. It's definitely been a bit of a what's a cat amongst the pigeons for the rest of the season so far. I think we've had quite a lot of exciting racing so far. But arguably, I think Berlin was probably to steal one of your talking points, a bit of a return to the peloton, perhaps.
Yeah. Peloton, it's not just a fashion of 2020. So peloton racing was something people complained about a lot in the early days of Gen 3. It seemed to be something Formula E had basically solved this season, and it turned out that, well, with Berlin being quite a hot race and quite a battery intensive race, actually nobody wanted to lead, and that did lead to a kind of a cycling style race. A lot more calculating and less aggressive than the early part of the season.
Yeah, agreed. It really did feel like nobody wanted to lead, at least for the first 20 or so laps until the pit boost cycle came around. And then there was a bit of a scramble to outmaneuver each other. I particularly enjoyed watching how Oliver Rowland was working the Delta against Nick Cassidy. I'll always love when Nick Cassidy's anywhere near the front, but it was good to see them racing towards the end. It was certainly a tactical race, but you sort of have to question whether running 5 seconds a lap below the pace for 20 laps is really a good advertisement for the sport. And to be completely honest, I love pit boost. I think it's the future of the sport, but it makes me wonder how Formula E could fix that mentality. Is it possible for them to add a second pit boost at some point? I don't know, but it's definitely something they're going to have to broach. I think if they could get 15% out of the pit boost and do it twice a race, they could probably avoid peloton racing completely and go near enough Grand Prix distances on the Gen 4s, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I'd even question, I was one of the people who felt that pit boost was necessary this season because they built the Gen 3 cars with a charging port on the back, and purely for marketing purposes, they had to have some form of charging element in the races, I felt. But that was on the understanding that I thought the races would be longer, and I thought there would be a sort of more tactical element in terms of when it could be used. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking in terms of everyday terms because that's how most fans think. If you're plugging your phone into the wall to get 15% of charge back, you're probably not using your phone that effectively. And I'm just not sure that pit boost as it is now is anything more than a kind of late stage compromise. I know that everything changes next season with Gen 4 anyway, and I'm looking forward to that immensely, as we'll look at later. But yeah, there's a lot of things about this final throw of the Gen 3 era that feel a bit compromise-ish, aren't there?
No, I definitely agree with that. But I think as an EV owner, I might slightly recontextualize. It's not quite the same as plugging your phone in. I routinely charge my car for 25% a day. And it's because my car has a battery buffer that the car itself manages. I don't have to worry about charging it to 80% and leaving it at that. So I just charge it to what the car tells me is 100%. And by virtue of the way that we pay for our energy bills here in the UK, it's cheaper at night. I get 5 hours of cheap energy. So I charge my car at night, and I charge it for that 25 to 30% every night. So I think in that vein, little and often as an EV driver does make sense in the real world. 10% is a bit too little, especially when, as you say, as you hinted towards, it doesn't really make the races any longer. As we noticed with Berlin race 1 and 2, the second race didn't have pit boost, and it was only 2 laps shorter, which, to be honest, is quite disappointing. Adding 10% of energy, you would expect them to maybe add 3 or 4 laps. And again, that's not that much, but it's something.
Yeah, and as we'll look at in more detail later on, maybe Gen 4 will fix that, because, if we have a double race weekend, a double header weekend, we're expecting to have a sprint first race and then a longer second race. So, with the increased capacity of the batteries of the cars and which are going to be much heavier, maybe we'll actually have the chance to have some, semi-endurance Formula E races.
To be honest, I think the sprints sound really exciting as well, because a lot of Formula E at the moment at a track like Berlin, when it gets too hot, is driving 5 seconds below the pace for 20 laps. Whereas if we have a short race, we might actually get to see what these cars can do in anger at full tilt for a whole race, which if it's 20 minutes long, that's exciting. That's not really much different to Formula One sprint, to be completely honest. The notion of that excites me. And I think that shows, if anything, how the potential of these cars, because they have a pace differential that's closer to Formula 2 than it is to GT3. Seeing fast cars race at full tilt is what motorsport fans want to see. Formula One are kind of having this same problem at the moment, where, especially in qualifying, the drivers feel weird because they can't really drive at full tilts. If anything, I think the Gen 4, the new format, sprint and feature, I think it'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I really hope Berlin doesn't get kicked from the calendar. It does feel, though, a bit like a remnant of the early days of Formula E, in that there aren't that many of those really small tracks anymore, where which are contained into a fairly small area of land. Tempelhof is a lovely place to go. I don't know if you've been to Berlin at all before, but like the track itself is basically like the main straight of Sebring all the time. So it's proper airfield, it's concrete, and that leads to a lot of tyre degradation, and you've also got a point to make about the batteries as well. So it does feel like teams and drivers are constantly on the edge of what they think they can do. You're supposed to cross the line on 0.0. That's how Formula E works if you're making maximum use of the battery. But it felt like, to get there, yes, there was a lot more compromise than usual.
No, I'm a bit of a believer in Berlin. I really like it as a track. I do have a bit of a bone to pick with how they name that triple apex corner a technical section, when really it's basically one turn. But that's more of a naming convention issue than an actual issue with the track. It's a fantastic track. It's great to race. We saw cars going 4 or 5 wide into corners, and granted, sometimes they didn't come out of the corner 4 or 5 wide, much to my boy Nick Cassidy's displeasure in race 2. It's a good racetrack for these cars, but as you say, we're not continuing with these cars anymore. We're going to the Gen 4s, and I feel like it might be a little bit too small for them. In context of that, what I said before about these cars reaching speeds much closer to Formula 2 than GT3, you would suspect that the FIA grading of the circuit needs to be higher for the newer cars, or at least that's sort of the implication of having more power, as you need tracks with wider runoffs, tracks that can handle the caliber of car. And I'm just not sure if Berlin circuit meets those higher standards in that
Mm.
regards. Yeah, it would be sad to see it fall off the calendar. I could understand why it would, to be completely honest, but it would be sad to see it drop off the calendar, especially after it ostensibly saved the COVID-affected season, the Berlin Tempelhof circuit.
Well, yeah, I just think it's one of those, hard to call them legacy tracks because Formula E's only been running for 13 years, but it's one of those tracks that has consistently brought some joy to the series. I mean, obviously there have been controversial disqualifications and there have been issues there, as at every Formula E race throughout the history of this particular sport, but I think that when people go to Berlin, they have a good time. There's all the German fast street food you can expect. There's a really good atmosphere around the E Village, and you've obviously got the old kind of, it's not the aircraft hangar, but it's the place where people used to work, like the tower. And you can go in there and there's stuff on display. So unlike a lot of street circuits, unlike a lot of, what you might call proper circuits, old-fashioned circuits, it feels like somewhere that's meant for a day out.
Yeah, I definitely understand that as someone that has to take a day out to get to their motorsport circuit. Knock Hill being my closest circuit, it has a cafe and it has been renovated in the last 20 years. And I love Knock Hill, but it is 20 miles away from anywhere. And that's generally the case for a lot of motorsport circuits, unless you're looking at somewhere like Silverstone, which is sort of in the heart of England's population centres. But I don't know. Yeah, it will be sad to see Berlin go for precisely that reason. I think it. I've been to Berlin a few times. I've never been for the E-Prix, but I think it just must have brought such a wonderful festival vibe to that section of the city, especially with the E-Village. And I am a little bit sad that I probably won't get to go to another Berlin E-Prix at the Tempelhof Airport in the same orientation as it is, because as I say, I love that circuit, but I just don't think the current or the new cars will allow for it, shall we say?
Yeah, but what a city to go to all the same, and there are plenty of other great Formula E venues, even if that one does eventually fall off the calendar. To talk about some of the things that happened in the first race, obviously Lola Yamaha decided to take the old Toyota in F1 strategy of basically running their tyres off for the first 10 laps to try and get an early lead, and then falling off. It may have been something that a back of the grid team would think was a good idea for marketing. It certainly got the yellow cars up near the front, but you could also argue, what does Lola and Yamaha actually have to prove by doing that marketing? I mean, people aren't going to buy more keyboards because they've seen Yamaha there, and Lola is an engineering company. You sort of wonder, wouldn't their reputations be better by going for something more consistent?
Yeah, it definitely did get them some TV time, but by the same token, I'm really not sure it helped them in any tangible way. An important point is that di Grassi remains the only driver with no points over the course of the season so far, and even then, Maloney's the next lowest ranked driver with only one. He gained that 7 races ago. We've gone through almost half a season now with no Lola Yamaha points whatsoever. So it's not really a great advertisement as much as running at the front of the race is fun. Yamaha, as you say, they don't really need that coverage to sell more bikes, even more keyboards, more anything they sell. It's not going to benefit them really in any way. And the same can be said for Lola. Realistically, the only thing that they could be advertising themselves to is, as a race team in Formula E, potential sponsors. But I think potential sponsors would rather see good race finishes than dead last, dog slow, 1 point across 7 races from 2 drivers. And yeah, it just seemed like a bit of a 2-lap flash in the pan, maybe, or at worst, a horrendously bad strategy call that actually did cost them a good result at the end. Because we watched, by the same token, in race 2, a similar situation where a driver did use his energy to pull away at the end. But that was the important thing. He did it at the end, not the start,
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And Lucas di Grassi, by the way, I think since our last podcast episode on Formula E, has announced he is stepping down he's retiring from motorsport, from driving at least. Hard to say anything nice about the man, but, ever since leaving Audi and, of course, claiming his Season 3 title, he's pretty much been the go-to for a new team or a small team that wants someone experienced to, bring up a young driver and sort of calm things down. Obviously, if you look at some of his footage from the pits, he's not always been the person doing that, but maybe in a sort of a Nigel Mansell sense, if you go back, he's often seen to be the one cajoling the team, sort of not being afraid to say it how it is to the engineers as he would see it. Not a nice person, but I think we can say his influence on Formula E as a sport is there to see in the results, isn't it?
Certainly. And he was one of the drivers I supported in the first season of Formula E. He drove for Audi, Abt Schaffler, or however that team was named in whichever order those words went in. It felt like it changed every other week. But yeah, and it will be interesting to see him leave the sport. Don't necessarily want to say sad, but I'm interested to see who will step up to replace him. With a major spot on the grid gone, a mainstay of the grid, someone that you would expect to be there effectively every year that he wanted to be there. It'd be interesting to see who fills those shoes on the grid, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And there'll be some other driver moves that we'll have to cover at some point today as well. But the winner of that first race was Nico Müller. It's his first win in Formula E, and it came after Pascal Wehrlein in the sister Pink Pig Porsche. Those cars specially coloured as a tribute to a very successful sort of dynasty of Porsche pink sports cars. By the way, much to my delight, I've been saying for years they should go with the Pink Pig, but honestly, I never thought it would happen because Porsche, at least in its current guise, doesn't seem like the sort of happy fun time brand that's going to do that kind of thing. And I just felt like the chance had gone. So very pleased to see it. But yeah, Muller with that first win, which is odd because Gemini in the last 2 laps gave him a 31% chance of winning, even though he was 3 seconds clear. So I think this is another fail for Gemini, and we're getting closer to the point where they either open up a window of OpenClaw to double check things, or they just kind of can the Gemini sponsorship and find another way for Google to market themselves.
Yeah, I will say on the Pink Pig livery, I've never been a fan of it. I know that's controversial. I'm a vegan. That's probably why. Okay. But I never really thought I'd see the pig livery in Formula E. I just thought I thought the idea of electric cars was far enough away from the idea of eating meat that they didn't really meld. But I guess I was wrong on that end. But yeah, interesting to see a throwback from Porsche's motorsport heritage there. I agree with you. They do seem a bit like, if you've watched Mr. Robot by any chance, Porsche are a bit like the evil corp of motorsport in a lot of ways, especially after how they handled themselves during the Formula One engine sagas. But anyway, that's a completely different story for a completely different time.
Well, I think motorsport is littered, by the way, with stories of Porsche being half in and then completely out in terms of engine formulae. So it's not the first time or the last time.
It's diabolical, and the most hilarious part is people are talking about them coming back again now that the regulations have changed. They got the regulations they wanted, decided they didn't want them. They've changed now, and they decided they might want them again. Anyway, again, you couldn't make it up. You really couldn't. But yeah, to get back to Gemini and the new race winner, Nico Müller, I think you probably be better off asking someone for their open source code of fork of Claude rather, after the recent Claude leak. But Gemini was all over the place again this weekend. It really missed the mark on pit boost as well. It said everyone would pit between laps 17 and 27, and yeah, I mean, I guess it got that correct, but basically everyone pitted on lap 20, and the commentator said so much as well. So I don't really understand why it would have been so hard for Claude to have ascertained that information as well. I don't understand where it gets its information from if it doesn't know that, because you would think it would be getting its information from the same place that the commentators are drawing theirs from. But anyway, by the by, good win for Nico Müller, and it's always nice to see someone take their first win in the sport, and it was actually a pretty commanding performance for him as well, to run away at the end and maintain that gap. And it's actually translated into surprisingly good championship position for him. I think he's in the top 3.
Let me double check while you're talking.
I think he's in the top 3 now. I think Cassidy's in the 6s somewhere in the weeds. So to put your first win on the board and ostensibly be in the shot in the title race already, I think he's doing well for himself. I think he's having a really good season. I'm not really scared for him to take any of the wins or anything, any championship wins, but I think he'll put in a really, really solid campaign this year. Maybe win another race, maybe even 2, but that probably would put him into title contention by the end of it. So we'll see. He's having a good season. That's, I guess the take-home message on Nico Muller. This was an inevitability, his first win.
Absolutely. And yeah, let's just briefly go through the standings now. I've got them on the screen. So Muller is indeed 5th now in the points, 75. Yeah. Roland is next from him on 83, and we've got something to say about him for the second race. Mortara 93, Evans 98, and Wehrlein leading on 101. So it's still relatively close, as we expect from Formula E, but I think the nice thing is that we're seeing a bit more maturity about the driving compared to the Gen 2 era, and I think we're seeing a bit more maturity in the way the championship's being fought out. We're not seeing the table change dramatically every race. We're not seeing leaders get put out in qualifying or in pile-ups. It's something where you can put your flag in the camp of a driver and support him without any problems, I think.
You say that, but Pascal Wehrlein was taken out right at the start of the first race, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, that's true. He had a terrible first race, obviously, and had to pit for new tyres. Yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing that happens, but it is something that happens less in this Gen 3 sort of latter era, I think.
No, and I'll say again, I think it's a testament to Pascal Wehrlein's consistency as a driver in the championship. He can get taken out of a race and still come out of it leading the championship. He can be taken out of a race over a weekend and still come out of the weekend leading the championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about someone else who's in championship contention, race 2, Mitch Evans came through to win, and this was not something that looked like happening at the start of the race, or indeed even at the midpoint of the race. But again, another Jaguar strategy masterclass. But you've got to be actually in the seat to execute it. And I think, we've bigged up Evans so much this season with good reason. And I think this is just another example of exactly what they're going to be missing next season, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it would be such a fantastic swan song for Mitch Evans and Jaguar as a whole and their whole partnership if this was Mitch's year. And I could really see this being Mitch's year. He's been driving fantastically, even when he has qualified badly and he's had to come through from the back. He's done it, and he's, I think, becoming an increasingly difficult challenge to deal with for the consistency of Pascal Wehrlein. Pascal will come in the top 4 every race, but Mitch will win 3 or 4 races. So it's sort of like immovable object meets unstoppable force in that way. I'm really looking forward to how the title fight pans out between these two for the rest of the season. I'm still not quite confident to commit either way as to who I think would win, but I would say if you gave me 12 eggs, I'd put 6 in each basket, put it that way.
Yeah, and I would say with both of them, they seemed to calm down a lot after their first win. I remember Wehrlein in his first couple of seasons, and indeed in his first season with Porsche when he had the problem in Puebla with the tyre passport, etc. And he seemed like someone very much on edge to prove himself. And I think, now he's got a title in the bag, and now is just a bit older, a bit more of a mature person. He's got a family, that kind of thing. I think we're seeing someone who seems a lot more settled in life, and that seems to be translating in a fairly clear way to how he executes on the track, because he doesn't seem to get down or bang tables when he has a problem like in race 1. He just seems to be able to, a bit like a tennis player when they have a bad point, instantly reset, doesn't he?
He is the polar opposite of the radio of Dan Ticktum. Is all I can really describe him as. And I think that's probably the best description of him as well, because I don't think he said anything on the radio, or at least nothing that was broadcasted, nothing that the broadcaster deemed entertaining enough to broadcast in light of some of Dan Ticktum's more entertaining outbursts. But yeah, I see Pascal, and I've long seen Pascal, even in the days of Formula One or before he got there, as one of the consummate professionals in motorsport. I always trust him to handle the car and himself pretty well. I'm open to in the future being proved wrong, but I've long liked Pascal Wehrlein for a lot of those reasons.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely, it looks like a straight fight between him and Evans. I can see them both taking wins off each other as we go through the season. And the Porsche and the Jaguar powertrain look like the most balanced on the most circuits. I think where Wehrlein may have the edge is very simply that Porsche know how to carry out a title win. I think Arsenal are showing this in the Premier League right now to switch sports. The longer you go without a title, even though you've got all the people and all the expertise you need, it sometimes takes you, stumbling over that step to actually feel capable of dominating, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I think we have that notion in racing is you have to win a race to know you can win a race, which is a really difficult thing to do if you haven't won a race before. But even to speak to my own experience, the first endurance race I won was a 3-hour GT endurance at Alton Park with a teammate who was significantly faster than me, who drove for 2 hours, I drove for one, and he effectively gave me a gap so that I could try and defend it for the rest of the time. And until I crossed the line on the final lap, I did not believe I was going to win that race because I'd never won a race before. I didn't have any evidence to say otherwise. The person chasing me was going to catch me and pass me, and that was going to be it. But they didn't. And that there's a moment in your mind there that solidifies, I'm a race winner now. And I think this probably is the same at all levels of motorsport. I think you probably even have the likes of Esteban Ocon I think Ocon only has one win. I'm sure it's just the one he has. I'm a race winner. I'm one of a very elite club that has won one of these races. And as a result of that, your career is effectively guaranteed in the sport.
I want to just segue this into talking a bit about Evans saying he's going to leave Jaguar because, it seems shocking because he's been there since, I think, season 3 was when Jaguar came. Yes, because it was Team Trulli until season 2, and then they
That's
folded
right.
and Jaguar took over the franchise. And he's been there right from the start. A bit like a driver we're going to mention later on, Ollie Rowland. He was not the star of the franchise to begin with. He made himself that through sheer force of talent, if you like. And I think it's testament to the dignity with which he usually conducts himself, and actually the dignity with which he conducted himself after that 5 minutes of madness when it looked like he should have had a chance of winning last time. But so he has this dignity with which he conducts himself, and therefore there's been almost no leak, as far as I can tell, as to why he's leaving. It might be as simple as, he's basically put the financial side of his career on hold for a while to try and do well at Jaguar, to try and do well as a Formula E driver. He's not poorly compensated by any means, as far as I can tell, but he has resisted double jobbing, going into WEC or anything like that, when other drivers have, because he said, look, I'm a Formula E driver, I earn enough, I'm happy with Jaguar, I want to commit. And I think that was a different mindset, and I'm not saying that will switch, but maybe he actually wants to earn as much dough as he can at a top team, while he's still relatively young. Or maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a clash in there that we don't know about. Maybe he's tired of always being the bridesmaid and wants to move to one of those big contenders. But, there are rumours he might move to the new Opel team when it comes in. I'm not so sure. I still think there are plenty of doors open at established top teams in Formula E. But what are your thoughts on someone so established at one team leaving after such a long time?
It'll hurt the team in terms of losing his expertise. I've long seen Mitch Evans as a sort of Fernando Alonso figure where the teams will vie for him to be in their first seat so he can lead the team and bring up their second driver. The team will miss him. As I said before, I'm excited to see who's going to take the step up to replace, not necessarily replace, but to fill the gap. We've seen very similar things happen recently in Formula One. I mean, granted, Lewis Hamilton didn't leave the sport, but he left his seat in Mercedes and was replaced by the guy who's now leading the championship, Kimi Antonelli. I think it's more accurately the end of an era, and that's probably why I think it would be so poetic for Mitch to take the championship this year.
I just wonder if maybe he might look to a franchise that's going to give him opportunities elsewhere as well. I mean, that was one reason why Jean-Eric Verne supposedly wanted to be involved with the, Stellantis umbrella, because as he knew he'd get a chance in WEC. Stoffel Van Dorn, on the other hand, was kicked out of the Genesis team quite late on for wanting to stay involved with Formula E. And actually, hiring Stoffel as reserve driver at Jaguar now looks like a masterstroke. You have to wonder, did they know something was afoot when they hired this third driver who was too good to be a third driver?
It was funny because I was just thinking, wouldn't it be great if Genesis had a Formula E team? Wait, I don't think they're going to be going down that route anytime soon, especially with their new hypercar and World Endurance, which got its first point, I believe, at the weekend. So that's a fantastic little feather in their cap, especially as early into the program as they are. But yeah, it really does seem like a bit of a masterstroke just to pull Stoffel Van Dorn out of the ether. I think it would be interesting to see how he could handle a Gen 4 car, especially as someone that's driven Formula One and has done reasonably well in Formula One, which is to say in a more powerful car than the Gen 3s and the Gen 2s. I would like to, and I know you would like to see him back on the grid. So I'm all for it. Why not? Why not have Stoffel Van Dorn come back?
I mean, look, I've got nothing to lose by being open about this. I thought it was an absolute travesty that you had, again, these are not bad drivers. There are no bad drivers on the FE grid, but I thought it was an absolute travesty that you had drivers still with something to prove, like Joel Eriksson and Zane Maloney on the grid, but not Stoffel Van Dorn. And I understood that, that's how management and contracts work sometimes. I just felt something maybe ought to have been done even at a sporting level to keep such a high-quality driver, in a regular driving job. But we'll see what happens next season. I wouldn't mind betting that you'll have Van Dorn and Da Costa next season, but we'll have to see what happens.
I would, in a similar vein, I would put an amount of eggs in that basket as well.
Yeah. Also, a word for Edo Mortara. He's third in the championship, not far. Well, he's on. As I look at the table now, he's on 93, which is only 8 points off Pascal Wehrlein in the lead. However, he's not won a race this season. It's incredibly rare in motorsport that a driver with no wins will win the title. So I think Mahindra has to translate that consistency into wins at some point. But the interesting thing is, I was astonished when I read that Mortara was nearly 40, because to me, he's perpetually 34 years old or thereabouts. That's mostly because I started, seriously covering Formula E in 2018-19 when he was. Things just get pickled in the good times sometimes. But the thing about Mortara is, from being the hot shoe who would regularly break his car, he's now Mr. Consistency. But again, does he need win, really, in order to be a title contender?
I don't know. I'm a Fornaroli truther. I will say I've long been a fan of Leonardo Fornaroli, and if he can win FIA Formula 3 without winning a race, FIA Formula 3 arguably being one of the most competitive series, especially when he was driving in it around at the time, I don't think it's necessary. It certainly helps, shall we say, but that's not to say that I think he won't win any races. I think Edo has a really good chance of winning a race this year. He's came close a couple times already. He's been running at the front reasonably consistently. I just think it's a matter of time for him. It would be really unfortunate for him if he didn't manage to grab one this season. I just really think he will. By the same token, he's as Pascal, he's a very consistent driver. I've said before that Pascal does Pascal things where he just comes in the top 4 every race. And by the time you get to August, you're like, oh, wow, he's winning the championship. But Edo is, I think, on a similar sort of trajectory at the moment. He's a very consistent driver now, and gone are the days of, as you say, being a hot shoe that constantly lost the car. He's a very consistent driver. He's a very safe and assured set of hands, and even if he's not winning the races, he's getting a very strong haul of points nigh on every weekend, and I don't think you can necessarily count him out from putting in a really solid performance. And if he gets a race win, he's going to be as close to the championship as anyone else with the points that he currently has and the gap that he currently has. So honestly, I wouldn't count him out of the championship either. I think he's probably the dark horse third candidate now that Nick Cassidy's a bit further away, as sad as that does make me to say. Ultimately, I do think it's between Mitch and Pascal, but I wouldn't count Edo Mortara out by any means. I think maybe to revise my eggs analogy, maybe if I have 12 eggs, maybe I put 5 in Pascal's basket, 5 in Mitch's basket, 1 in Edo's basket. I just keep 1 for me.
A rumour came along which seemed to be very much, Sam Smith from the race putting 2 and 2 together, but still, nonetheless, it makes logical sense that he might possibly be one of the drivers Porsche is considering for their B team next season. It seems right because supposedly they are bringing in someone with no Formula E experience for that seat. And that they might well want someone with plenty of Formula E experience. Also, I've got no doubt that he would love to move to the Porsche stable, given he was an Audi driver and he's got plenty of experience with the big German manufacturers. I also think he'd be a great driver to have on board as an ambassador for that team as well. I do question the logic of Porsche making a B team at the same time that their losses have reached record levels because of their pivot. Apparently because of their pivot to EVs in production cars when people haven't been ready to go for them. But Porsche and Jaguar in that sense are in a similar bucket, aren't they, in terms of they're both manufacturers who I would say have quite uncertain medium-term futures, but have essentially put all their eggs in the basket of doing well in Formula E and kind of hoping that builds up some production car success in the future. The difference obviously being Jaguar currently don't have a production car in production and Porsche do and are just desperately trying to get them off the forecourt.
Yeah, I think maybe from Porsche and Jaguar, there's a little bit of a return to an old adage of win on Sunday, sell on Monday, especially when it comes to their new EVs. Jaguar are pivoting basically their entire brand around this new EV that they're launching. And I think perhaps this is what both of these brands view as their way of competing with China, arguably, really, isn't it? We have so many, honestly, fantastic cheap EVs flooding the market at the moment, whether it's the BYDs or JQ or even the new MGs, which are made in China. When I was looking for my car, bought a Peugeot, but my second choice was a bright orange MG4. And I think when we go back to the last podcast we did was about the BTCC, and one of the things we said there was it was a series where you supported the team of the car that your dad drove in a lot of cases for a lot of people. And granted, Porsche and Jaguar are not the most accessible brands in the world at the moment in terms of cost. They're certainly more expensive than BYD, shall we say. But I think in terms of their perception in their traditional markets, they're losing a lot of ground to companies like BYD when it comes to selling EVs. And one of the ways that I think they're trying to engooden themselves again is by really getting involved in the likes of Formula E and electric motorsport. Even Porsche, the Porsche Mission R as a concept car is a really exciting bit of tech. And I think that's what pushes at least a lot of Europeans towards these European brands, is because we can still see them on a monthly basis. I wish there were more Formula E races so that I could see bi-weekly. But in this case, it will be bi-weekly when we go from Berlin to Monaco. But yeah, I think there's an element of that nature there. It's a return to, or an attempt to return to a win on Sunday, sell on Monday for Porsche and Jaguar. Is that what I would say on that?
Yeah. One other piece of news that came off the race this week is, and I'll just cover this quickly and then we'll talk about Monaco. The Citroën team, which rose out the ashes of the MSG Maserati team, which folded due to essentially MSG running out of cash and being unable to fund the operation, the Monaco Sports Group. So what happened was Formula E operations took over the Monaco Sports Group, and then Citroën Stellantis basically said, we would like to run this as a franchise. But Formula E has still been involved in behind the scenes in finding a long-term future for the team. Beth Peretta, who was the sporting director of Formula E and is someone I really like, actually. She used to run her own IndyCar team. She was the first female team principal there. But she's now involved with basically finding long-term external investment for Citroën. I would say it's testament to Formula E looking ahead and wanting to preserve the sport that it's willing to get involved in this way. But obviously, the counterpoint to that is other teams are pointing out, well, you've basically got a team that's owned and run by Formula E staff here, and it's well, almost certainly a conflict of interest in the traditional sporting sense. But this is something that we will look into in more detail, I think, in the post-Monaco podcast when we've got more information on it. But Monaco itself, we mentioned the Monaco Sporting Group, which obviously isn't doing so well anymore. It's basically a shell company now. But the Monaco race is something that needs to remain in Formula E purely for the prestige, isn't it? I mean, ever since Formula E started going to Monaco when it used to race in the cut-off track, it's been something that I think has added a certain glamour to Formula E. In the Gen2 era, it started providing excellent racing. Not so much anymore, as Jonathan Gitlin points out on our Discord server, but I think it's something that still needs to be there, even if as we move into Gen 4, the racing is going to be compromised because the cars are too quick for it.
I think it's a difficult line to walk. I will say firmly in the camp that loves Monaco, but I'm also not ignorant to its flaws. And I think that's sort of the only way you really can be with it in any modern racing environment. You have to be aware that the cars were not designed for, well, rather, the circuit was not designed for these cars. These cars are being shoehorned onto this legacy track, to use a term that you used earlier, legacy in more of the context of a motorsporting legacy. It's a prestige track. That's what it's there. It's there for legitimacy's sake. By that token, I personally don't really think Formula E necessarily needs it anymore. The Gen 4 car, I would say, really speaks for itself in terms of legitimacy in that respect. Gone are the days of the original Spark chassis, which was a bit of a joke, to be completely honest. It did a really important thing for giving the sport its start, but it wasn't a particularly inspiring race car. The Gen 4 is. The Gen 4 feels raw, it feels exciting, it feels like something you can't wait to see being ripped around the track and raced in anger with other ones. The Spark 01 was aggressively mid, to put it politely. I think it also speaks to something that Formula One is having at the same time, where it's sort of struggling to not look like a circus with its change to these new regs, while Formula E has seemingly knocked them out of the park with the Gen 4. And I mean, obviously the Gen 4 hasn't taken the track yet in anger, so we won't really be sure about that, but it's really good to see the direction be so clear-cut, regimented and assured. They know they're going in the right direction, and one of those moves is a move away from street circuits to full-time autodromes. Maybe Monaco is just another part and parcel of that. Perhaps it's not a case of we leave Monaco because the cars aren't suited for it anymore. Perhaps it's a case of we leave Monaco because we've outgrown street circuits and we replace it with something equally as prestigious. Maybe these cars one day can race at the full Silverstone Grand Prix layout. That's not to say that I think necessarily Silverstone has the same pull as Monaco. It might for a British audience, obviously, but I would love to see Formula E's new cars race at hundreds, there probably isn't thousands of unrealistic tracks like Sebring, like Sonoma. It's not going to happen, but I would love to see it. And part of that is Monaco street circuits sort of take up a spot on the calendar for things like that to happen. So while I completely agree, I love Monaco. I think it's fantastic. I don't necessarily think it's necessary anymore. I think Formula E has reached a point where it can stand on its own 2 feet without having to have those performative performances of legitimacy by going to tracks like Monaco. I don't think they need it anymore. It's nice to have it. I don't think they need it.
Yeah, it's sort of more there because visiting Monaco gives you a sense of being part of motorsports history, as you quite rightly said. I think that the reason why the racing was so great in Gen 2 was because Gen 2 was still just slow enough for you to appreciate the racing and for cars to perform overtakes in places where it just wasn't possible with, modern day F1 machinery. But as I think you said before the podcast, and Jonathan Gitlin said as well on Discord, the best way to watch Monaco now is the historic Grand Prix, because that's where the excellent racing happens at Monaco these days. In that sense, then it's a bit of an exhibition race, and hopefully I'm proven wrong next weekend as we record this. Hopefully there'll be an excellent show just to round out the Gen 2 era. But I do agree with you. I think with Gen 4 coming in, Monaco has a problem, or Formula E has a Monaco problem, because those cars are genuinely explosive and they're going to knock people's socks off on even the wider circuits. I think Monaco will be a bit of an issue. Yeah, James Rossiter ran the Gen 4 car for the benefit of Formula E viewers, and he was speaking on the radio while driving, and he sounded a bit out of breath, even though he's a perfectly fit racing driver, and he was saying how unbelievably exciting it was and how unbelievable it was in terms of its acceleration. And a lot of the time when I think test drivers say that for the cameras, I think, well, they're doing that to promote the sport. Of course he was, but I got the sense he was telling the truth this time, that he was genuinely blown away by what they'd made. I mean, that Gen 4, it looks like a Dallara Super Formula car, which is my favourite single-seat race car in terms of looks. It's got 600 kilowatts of power, and it's got always-on all-wheel drive. I think that's the car that will stop people using Formula E as a meme, if indeed they still do. Obviously, the Max Verstappens of this world will continue to dig out Formula E whenever they need to criticise F1, but I think Formula E, especially with Formula One in its current funk with the rules and with the format of the sport, and with them going into a situation where they had something that was nailed down and which they were very proud of, and all of a sudden, because we've had 4 races of people complaining it's not like it used to be, they're turning on a dime, and you've got Ben Sulayem and Domenicali saying, well, maybe we were wrong, and it feels like Formula One's in a funk that it hasn't been in since the start of Drive to Survive. And equally, it feels like Formula E's finding its feet again after quite a difficult period.
No, I completely agree. I think when you mention the Max Verstappens of the world, the haters are gonna hate, to borrow a term from popular culture. If that makes me down with the kids, if that's what they're still saying. I can't wait to see the Gen 4s in anger for the first time, and I hope I've made that clear. I think a lot more people than let on are quietly curious about how these cars will perform. As you say, they're explosive. They're bona fide racing machines more than anything we've had in Formula E before. They're capable of lap times quicker than GT3s and in some cases even Formula 2. Why couldn't this be a golden age for EV racing with the start of the Gen 4? As I said, the likes of the Porsche Mission R is an incredible piece of technology, but the Gen 4 is real. Not to say that the Porsche isn't real, but it's actually racing. And I think that's so exciting. The most important part for me is that Formula E seems very clear in their direction. And we mentioned that before. It inspires a lot of faith in the audience when the organizers of the racing series are assured in their direction. And I think you mentioned Drive to Survive. For me, the events of Abu Dhabi 2021 were one of the largest repelling factors I've ever felt from any single motorsport, because it just felt so poorly organized. Results aside, I'm not for a second mentioning the result here, but the disorganization of the event, the political campaign that went on afterwards to change the meaning of the word any, it didn't feel like something that you could trust to be the same next week. And Formula E, I think we really have that faith in it now. We know that whether the race is going to be a peloton or not, we're going to have a good race at some point. And the cars are going to race each other. We're going to have elbows out racing. It's going to be good to watch. You know what to expect. I don't even know if Formula One knows what to expect from itself at the moment. And I think Formula E seems to know exactly where it's going and exactly what it's doing. And I think that's maybe the thing that excites me the most.
And look, it's worth being honest in your praise in the same way you're honest in your criticism. And I have clowned on the management of Formula E in the past for what I felt were disastrous marketing decisions related to TV deals, related to advertising, but it's a product that actually speaks for itself. And that makes marketing a lot easier because you don't have to focus away from the cars because there's no reason to compare them to anything else negatively. As far as I'm concerned, if the Gen 4 car delivers on 50% of its potential right now, it will take Formula E to a level that the sport has not been at.
Completely agreed. I watched, is it Law VS's video recently about the Formula One shadow calendar, as he calls it. Obviously, tracks are begging to be on the calendar for Formula One. It's the biggest show in the world. But I really think the Gen 4 is going to have tracks begging to run it. I really do.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's all for now, but we will talk about the Monaco E-Prix after it happens, and really looking forward to that, actually. It's just nice to travel through television sometimes, let's put it that way. But for now, thank you so much to Georgie Mackay. This has been the Motion Racing Podcast. If you'd like to follow us on YouTube, I would love for you to do that. Equally, if you'd like to rate us and say something nice on Spotify or other audio platforms, always happy if you do that. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll speak to you and hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye.